Now, if I can say you designed a product that you knew is faulty, that as we talked when we talked to the AAFA folks on the last podcast, you have internal documents that show that you're aware of $16 billion of fraud on your platform, and you still decided to go forward, I can now show you created harm intentionally.
The Imitation Nation podcast covers all things counterfeit, hosted by Shabbir and Sven of the Partnership for Safe Medicines and Sven Bergman of Venture Global.
In this episode of Imitation Nation, Sven and I will talk about a bust that CBP Cincinnati did of illegal peptides and how they describe the smuggling technique used to get them in. We'll talk about a $1.2 million literal bill washing counterfeiting scheme that was busted in Arizona. We'll talk about a new technique from Dr. Grover, who runs the UC Riverside lab dedicated to cheap anti-counterfeiting techniques, of how he's shown that in 30 seconds, he can dissolve a pill and tell you if it's real or fake. And finally, we'll talk about a huge legal loss that Meta experienced that could allow parents whose children have been killed by drug dealers operating off social media platforms to get justice. More in the episode. Well, Sven, welcome to Imitation Nation 29. We're still draftable.
We're still draftable. I didn't even know what the draft age is. What is the draft age?
I mean, it starts at 18.
All right.
Or maybe it starts at 17. I don't know. But 29 is still draftable. And they're going to start doing it automatically for people. So automatic registration.
Well, good to see you, my friend. I know you're about to. That's why you're like dressed up in a suit and everything. You're about heading to Sacramento, right? So you're doing important work.
Yeah, I'm going to go try and explain why some of the compounding ingredients that people have seen in medicines need to be tested a little more thoroughly.
That would be very good. That seems like a worthwhile endeavor. Well, Godspeed, and I know you'll do great.
Thank you. Thank you. So speaking of poorly made medicines, or in this case, entirely unapproved ones, in your neck of the woods, since people maybe don't know that you live in Ohio, CBP Cincinnati is one of the standout offices that either does amazing work and talks about it, or maybe just talks about it, and they all do amazing work. But CBP Cincinnati published a whole crime, basically. What they had said is that they opened up this carton, and it was probably at the end of 2025, and what they found inside was a bunch of smaller prepackaged shipments of illegal peptides, right? These are things that people buy online that are not made in FDA approved facilities and inject in themselves without them being an FDA approved product, right? So it's like you bought a random chemical off of the internet and you're putting it in your body through a needle, right? So that's bypassing crazy. A lot of your body's defense system. All these prepackaged packages that were hidden inside a larger carton possibly had a cover load of something else like sofa parts. Mm-hmm. And then not declared on the manifest. And they realized that what they basically had opened up was a smuggling operation. Someone had collected a bunch of orders off of a website and prepackaged them, put them in here and hoped that nobody would notice. And if they got one big package through, a technique known as master carton smuggling, they would be able to then have a compatriot on the other end ship all this stuff out to the individuals. And they did this and then started looking around as good federal agents do, and they found 300 more of these master cartons coming into the country and intercepted them. So it's a really great story of good law enforcement work, a really great story of protecting the American public. And if I could send a box of lunch to the CBP Cincinnati crew, I would, but you probably are not allowed to do that for good reason.
Probably not. You know, with Cincinnati, first of all, I agree. I think at one point in time we should try to get, if we can get the chief of the port of Cincinnati, who does amazing work, because Cincinnati, especially on the IP front, always catches some amazing cases. And I think they're well trained. I think that the port understands the importance of it. And so they always do great things. What I found really interesting about the peptides that they had here was, it's one of the first times where I see this smuggling of pharmaceuticals go into these criminal schemes that I have seen on other counterfeits, including that we have seen on narcotics. when narcotics, when fentanyl pills were heavily imported through small parcels, this was the method. Master cartons or master cases with hundreds of envelopes, pre-addressed, pre-enveloped, pre-labeled, pre-everything, coming in. Once they get through, the person that receives this literally just took the box and dumps it in the mail stream, right? So and then it gets, the final mile gets delivered with U.S. Postal Service. And I found that very interesting that the peptides are now at a level where that kind of criminal level of operationality is now being implemented here. So it kind of shows you where this goes, and deeply concerning, as I think you pointed out, none of these peptides are anywhere near FDA approval, right? So this is just some random chemical that some influencer manosphere said, like, yeah, you should be using this. So this is incredibly dangerous, not even just the injecting part. It's the taking compounds that haven't been studied. You don't know what they're going to do long term, short term, medium term. It's incredibly dangerous. So big applause to Cincinnati, and concerning to see that this is operationalizing now at a higher level.
You know, there's a really good master carton smuggling tutorial on CBP's website that I was reading, and it wasn't mentioned in this story, but they said that in many cases when they bust a master carton smuggling operation, the postage on the individual enclosed packages is also counterfeit, right? Someone has basically printed fake postage. So they pass this carton in and someone dumps it into the mail stream, and it gets delivered, and the Postal Service ends up delivering it and not getting paid for it, which is terrible. Some of the peptides being sold here included the new Cagrosema product, which has not been approved by the FDA, retatrutide, which has not been approved by the FDA, and yet people all over the world are taking it, but especially here. The Guardian did a great article that PSM profiled last week about labs that are testing these on behalf of private citizens and finding significant both impurities and sterility problems, as well as many of these peptides. They're labeled as retatrutide, but don't contain retatrutide. It's just, you've abandoned all regulatory protection, and you probably will wish you had that when you hurt yourself.
Yeah, no, it is. It's absolutely crazy. And what doesn't help is kind of when you see in the kind of influencer space, folks that start talking about peptides, the administration even talking about, oh, peptides should be something really great, and starting to make comments or near medical claims without any medical studies done on what it does. And folks are not well enough educated by these products that are not by any means approved for human consumption at this point. And I think it's extremely, extremely dangerous. And I really hope we don't have large human impact danger events where people get really sick from taking these. So that's kind of what I really hope is not happening here. So we'll see.
I agree. I was looking over the wins of CBP Cincinnati. Just their press releases for the last year show 4 or 5 different notable events where they protected patient safety just in the medical space. Also protecting people from getting ripped off from different kinds of counterfeit products, and of course catching drug smuggling. It's either a great operation and a great press office, or it's a great operation and it's happening even more often than we hear about, because they probably don't have time to write up all the crazy stuff they find. But hats off to them. I hope someday to have someone from CBP Cincinnati on the show to talk about the kind of work they do, but they are definitely protecting American lives every day.
Yeah, I think at a minimum we should, from Imitation Nation, write them a thank you letter and let them know if they ever want to talk about their cool operations. We'd love to have them on the show and kind of see where it goes and send it to their CIO. So I have something different, but it actually fits in, because one of the trickiest pieces for, customs, law enforcement, investigators is always to identify what's a counterfeit, right? And so there's a cool new technology that we read up on that helps authenticate prescription drugs and helps identify counterfeits. So what right now is happening, if you see something, for example, at the Port of Cincinnati, if you want to authenticate it, you most likely will end up sending it to a lab, right? It might be a state lab, might be a federal lab, might be an FBI lab, but you most likely will try to end up identifying it since most of those are there. And so that takes time, that takes resources, and just really bottlenecks it up because pills or medicines can look very similar, like the peptides. Most likely it's just some form of white powder, I would assume. And so the researchers at UC Riverside have developed a new low-cost counterfeiting drug detector that works by measuring how pills dissolve. So they take pills, put them in water. They have a sensor on them. The sensor is really interesting because it's a very inexpensive infrared sensor, actually one that originally worked for a kid toy robot that kind of can see lines. My kids actually used to have that robot. And that infrared sensor sees how the pill dissolves and then compares it to the genuine dissolving that they have tracked. And what they found is that when it's a genuine pill, it always dissolves the same way because it's made obviously highly controlled, exact same makeup, exact same pressing, all of it, and it dissolves exactly the same way. Counterfeit does a couple of things. A, it doesn't dissolve like the regular thing would dissolve. Plus, every counterfeit pill most likely will dissolve differently because counterfeiters don't have the production standards in there. And so they tested it and they tested over 30 different medications and saw that their system detects pills with a 90% accuracy in the span of less than a minute, which is amazing. And so that's really cool because if you start to, like, one of the reasons why like field tests are really great to quickly test for fentanyl or cocaine, it exists in the controlled substances space, right? So this has the opportunity to create a field test where at a port of entry, somewhere in the pharmaceutical supply chain, a pharmacist could do it, patients could do it, where they have this very cheap tool where they're estimating this might be able to be built for under $30, which would be really cheap. And you basically throw it in a glass of water, you see how it dissolves, and the tool then can say, yep, that is or isn't counterfeit. So I love the ingenuity of that technology that came out of UC Riverside. We're going to put a link to it on the show note of the study. And it's a very cool way for a problem that has been vexing people for quite a while.
Yeah, this is Dr. William Grover's innovative engineering lab out of UC Riverside. And I think that man must be like a one-man anti-counterfeiting technology engine, because this is not the first time he's come up with a low-cost anti-counterfeiting tool for helping verify the authenticity of medicine. And I'm so impressed with his work. He's been on the PSM podcast once, and this is his wheelhouse. Low cost, easy to implement. I've seen walk-up testing tools that drug manufacturers have where there's a flow of air and you can walk up to that flow of air with a sample and put it in and it will give you a pretty quick answer. But I can guarantee you that costs a lot more than $30.
Yes. No, I think it's great. Yeah, and I love that the sensor is literally, I forgot what the toy is called. I gotta look it up. But for kids' toys where you can mark them and then the robot will follow the lines and they're like, oh, this sensor would actually work for that. And they take like the cheapest sensor and they're like, this works. So I love it. And it's open source. So once it's available, you can gonna build your own testing tool. So yeah, he does great work.
Amazing work. All right. Money, 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 money. It's a fake money story. One of my two favorite topics. So I saw stories this week about counterfeit money in India, the UK, Canada, Ukraine, and Myanmar. Wow. But I saw the thing that I wanted to talk about is there was a really big bust in Arizona, and authorities there caught two men in the middle of what they say is a bill washing scheme, where you take real currency so that you can use the tactile qualities of the paper, which is different, as you know, than like printer paper, and cleaning it off of the previous ink and then reprinting a high dollar note. So maybe you take ones and you maybe literally wash the ink off, bleach the ink off, and then you reprint them as $100 bills. And the first thing everyone does when they have a bill they think is counterfeit is they rub their fingers over it. And so this is going to help pass that test. It's going to feel really real. It's going to have that linen feeling to your fingertips. Then reproducing all the security measures is going to be a lot easier. If you do all of that and then it fails the counterfeit pen, you may doubt yourself, right? If it's got all of these tests that you've done that it's passed. But they found them with about $1.25 million worth of material for fake currency, some of which was halfway through printing. So I'm guessing they printed one side of the $100 bill, but not the other. And it was really, really, really good bust. And it talks a lot. You know, we talked in the last episode about Chinese printers sending $1 billion worth of counterfeit currency into Western Europe. Right, this is homegrown. We brought manufacturing back to the U.S. We brought counterfeit bill manufacturing home, so it can be done right by Americans.
No, this is really, it is such a good case, because one of the things we discussed, especially with the bill washing, because U.S. currency is made from a different material, right? It's made from a fiber, not from a paper, or has like a cotton in it. That in order for you to be able to trick the detection pens, because the detection pens react to the starch and the cotton, bill washing is one of the best techniques. So for them to do this, I think is fantastic. Now, I'm said that the scale of it, that's quite impressive. So, the amount of fake money that's out there right now that we keep finding, it is just, it's really surprising. It's really surprising that it doesn't stop, but maybe it's that easy.
I mean, if you're going to make $1 million, they say they caught them with 1.25 million. If you're going to make $1 million in fake currency, you need what? 10,000 $100 bills? If that's what you're making. And so if those started out as ones, you're already in the hole $10,000. Like, this is not a entrepreneurial project without costs. Like, you have to go into some amount of debt. But they had, printing machines, and they had special inks. They said that they seized special inks. It's a lot of work. This,
And the reason why it's really interesting, especially if they wash them from singles or 20s to hundreds, the 100 is one of the few one that has additional security features in it, including a plastic strip in the middle and all of that. The other currencies don't have that. So if they fake hundreds, they might be faking old hundreds, because you don't have the additional security strip in there. So that's the question. Or do they just wash them up to 20s, which that's a lot of work, or 50s maybe. But it's certainly an interesting. Side note, that's actually one of the reasons why Europe has different sizes on all their currencies, because it doesn't allow you to wash up. Our currency is one of the few
fascinating. I had no idea.
Yep. One of our currencies, one of the few currencies where from a 1 to 100, it's the same size. Every other currency, they get larger. Italy famously so used to have $1,000 lira, which looked like a newspaper you're unfolding.
This reminds me also of that old book by Catherine Eban called Dangerous Doses. And in Dangerous Doses, the criminals got a low-dose medicine that was made in a bottle that looked exactly like the high-dose medicine. And they took up, 100,000 vials of a low-dose medicine and dropped them into paint cans of paint thinner in the Florida heat and soaked all that stuff off, and then pulled them back out, put new labels on, and it went from like, $150 vial to like a $550 vial. And they made gazillions and gazillions of dollars in just that one step.
Yeah, the ingenuity of folks.
Yeah, I mean,
incredible.
Yeah, valid packaging. If you can get valid packaging and repurpose it, you can really do a lot. Now, I think those vials all look different, and so that was part of their anti-counterfeiting technique, was to do that.
No, that is absolutely crazy. All right, I'm gonna switch gears on you here, okay? So, and this will be a little bit longer, but it's one of those things that we briefly mentioned it on one of the previous pods, and I wanted to kind of spend a minute here discussing what I think are some pretty exciting developments. So there was a set of 3 recent rulings against Meta and other social media platforms. And so let me take a step back of what it is to explain to folks what it is, right? So for years, as counterfeit items or items that produce harm or harm to teens, as parties that have experienced harm were trying to make social media companies take content down or moderate better and not produce these effects on society that are not wanted. social media companies have been hiding behind Section 230, right? Section 230 basically saying, hey, because we are not responsible for the content, we're just intermediaries, we're not publishers, and so that shields us from liability of content. And Section 230, you and I many times have been fighting against it, was very good. But what it meant that in practical terms, if a counterfeit good, a harmful product, illegal activity, anything shows up on the platform, including things that result in harm to youth, like buying counterfeit fentanyl pills, right? You and I have obviously met families that have literally lost children to buying counterfeit pills off of social media platform, or if those platforms now cause self-harm in youth because of the impacts that they have. The default position always was like, this is not our responsibility. Responsibility is with the seller, or the responsibility is with the user. And so we as a platform, which is hosting, we're not responsible. And Section 230 shielded them very effectively from it. Well, so the greatest, there have been 3 recent rulings in cases where the plaintiffs, instead of going after the usual, you got to moderate better, went from a product liability angle. And what they said is they made the argument, you designed a product that the internal documents really what got them. Internal documents showed that you knew it was faulty. It is a faulty design product. You knew it's causing harm. You knew it allows fraud. You knew there's self-harm to youth, et cetera, et cetera. And besides you knowing that the product is faulty, you decided to ship and sell it. And in 3 separate cases, juries and courts have agreed and said, yep, that legal theory is actually what works. The first one was in California. A jury found Meta negligent in the design of Instagram, specifically around features that were allegedly used, were creating addictive use, and allowed the liability to attach based on how the product itself was built and presented. There was a $5 million judgment. While that doesn't sound like a lot, there's 1,500 similar cases pending. So that adds up, right? In New Mexico, at the same time, a jury went further and said Meta was responsible for $375 million under the state's consumer protection framework. Same thing. You created a harm. There's consumer protection laws, and they enabled harmful activities. And in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts State Supreme Court said a case like this can move forward for the same reason. You didn't design the product properly to protect youth. And so that's a drastic shift, right? So now moves the debate from, content moderation and am I really responsible for other people say, to like, you designed a faulty product. It's very similar litigation that ultimately was used against big tobacco back in the 90s. Similar logic. These are faulty products. They're creating harm and you knew about them. And so for the world of counterfeit, this opens up an entire new avenue, because I, as a company now, if I can say, you designed a product that you knew is faulty, that you know, as we talked when we talked to the AAFA folks on the last podcast, you have internal documents that show that you're aware of $16 billion of fraud on your platform, and you still decided to go forward. I can now show you created harm intentionally. So this could be a complete shift. Now, this will take years, maybe a decade to resolve, but I thought this was a drastic development for them to have 3 losses all on the same legal theory. That was a rough week for Zuckerberg and his team, but very, very, for me, exciting way that hopefully forces them to better their business practices.
Yeah, it's a notable development. I remember when we first started at PSM documenting incidences of mostly teens buying or meeting their drug dealers who would sell them a pill with fentanyl instead of an actual painkiller like an oxycodone, and dying. Seeing the platforms talk about Section 230. I was around at the birth of Section 230. I remember when it was passed into law in Congress, and it was about speech, right? If you say something that somebody else doesn't like, that's between you and them. The platform shouldn't be held responsible. But I think, and not just in this case, turning everything into speech and then hiding behind something like Section 230 or the First Amendment is never good, right? My drug dealing is not speech, right? Me selling counterfeit medicine online, yes, I probably had to type or post graphics. That is not protected speech. And
Right.
the Section 230 liability is being misused in these cases. And it doesn't always apply, right? We know child and sexual abuse material does not receive Section 230 protection.
Yeah.
And I don't think that drug dealing should either. So it's really interesting. And I've talked to litigators who are working in the Social Media Victims Law Center, working with advocates like Amy Neville, whose son Alexander was killed by a Snapchat-based drug dealer. And, they talk about how the product, when they make user accounts that look like teenagers, they end up as user accounts that gravitate towards the worst things, right? If you just keep scrolling, they end up, dwelling on things like depression and suicidal ideation, right? They just, to say it's a faulty product is not, if you want to be a living, happy teenager, they're faulty products. They're definitely faulty products. These are interesting litigation strategies. I'm glad to see them starting to work. My hope is that they end up fixing the problem. I don't necessarily want to see Meta sued, but if that's what it takes to get them to fix the product, then that's what it'll take.
No, and to your point, when the Section 230 was passed, right? When you look actually at the records and legislative history of what was discussed at the time, again, we're dating ourselves, right? But MySpace was around, right? And so the concern was, okay, if I have MySpace and Sven decides to upload a new post and I put a Bon Jovi song under my post, MySpace was concerned because at that time, remember Napster was around, like we're dating ourselves, but that's the time frame when 230 was passed. And the publishing companies were very aggressive on pirated music. And folks like MySpace, et cetera, were worried, like, if I have a post on my website where, Dumb Sven used Bon Jovi, now Universal or whoever owns the rights will come after me for copyright violation of these songs and sue me for massive copyright violation. And that was the idea that, like, if a user posts something with an image or a music that they didn't have the right to, you're not liable. That was the idea behind it. I get it. And I can talk myself into that. That makes sense. But you're right. It went way beyond. It's not about free speech anymore. You are committing acts, or you are knowledgeable of acts that are clearly criminal. And just to say, well, it's free speech. So I hope there will be a meaningful change there now, because again, for other industries, you see it once there are large court settlements is normally what produces change in corporations. So let's hope it happens quickly.
I think I've seen legislative proposals that have not gone anywhere to basically poke a hole in Section 230 for things like controlled substance dealing. I fear that because of the platform's refusal to cooperate with those proposals previously, what they're going to get now is much more broad-based liability in product liability. And hopefully hindsight's never really very satisfying, but in this case, the hindsight of saying you probably should have listened to those grieving parents about the drug dealers operating on your platform, because when you refuse to talk to them or work with them or actually handle this problem, they found a different legal strategy that is much worse for you.
Yeah. No, I would not be surprised if this ends up very similar how tobacco ended up in the late 90s, early 2000s, where thousands of lawsuits, states suing everybody. There will be a master settlement of some sort that will transfer a gigantic amount of money to victims, states, all of that. The platforms will agree to some form of measures of will do better. That'll be the question. Like, are those measures that they're already doing, are they really meaningful or not? And ultimately it will regulate the industry back down. But then, quite honestly, and I'm a bit of a cynic on it, then that will get taken over by AI, because that's the next one that's not regulated. And I don't know what all the impacts are. And AI will most likely naturally eat social media. And so then that'll be the next cycle. So I predict this to become a master settlement agreement of some sort between states and plaintiffs with hopefully good guardrails and it would be lovely if you stop selling counterfeit or producing harm in youth on your platforms, which, as we have shown, when you told them, please take pill presses down, and they did, they can, right? Like, you told them, stop selling pill presses, and there was a great reporter that reported on it, and they could stop it. So you can, you just don't want to.
You
right?
just don't want to. That's right.
They just don't
That's
want
right.
to.
I mean, I hope that all the people who post pictures of their counterfeit Adderall and their counterfeit Oxy appreciate how hard these platforms have gone to bat to protect their free speech rights from marketing their counterfeit pills. They're not going to get a thank you for any of them, but what they are going to get is a whole lot of unwanted legal liability across all areas, not just counterfeit pharmaceuticals. But again, I guess the hindsight is 2020. Well,
Let's
that
keep up
is
the good
all the
work,
stories we had for today, episode 29. We thank you for listening. We are looking forward to having more guests in the future. If you haven't checked it out, Jen Hanks and Connor O'Brien from the American Apparel and Footwear Association talked to us a lot about some really dangerous chemicals that they found in a survey of counterfeit products. So not only were you getting ripped off on that hat that maybe had your favorite sports team on it, but it was also soaked in formaldehyde, which is not something you want to put on your head and then sweat in and have it seep into your skin. So go check out that interview on our channel, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. I also really like the one where they pointed out there was a jacket that was literally lined with lead. Anyways, with that, Shabbir, read us out.
The Imitation Nation podcast is a production of Cause Stories and is the sole owner of this production. All statements are their own and not the opinions of their employers. Podcast management by Sarah Imber Safdar. Theme music written by Jonathan Boyle.